Hello, and welcome to another episode of Solipsist Rambles, where once again I have another bee in my bonnet, as usual. And as is often the case, this is a bit of a continuation bee on a previous topic of a sort. The longtime viewers of this show and this channel in particular will remember me talking about this on various occasions, but in a recent, or not so recent, I guess, Solipsist Rambles, I talked about how I rattled off a bunch of topics that were related to the one that I was talking about, to the point that I don't even remember which episode it was. And one of them I mentioned was how I said, just rattled off a title, the internet only has time for speed, not accuracy. And that one is one I think about a lot, because it's not just the internet, it's really all of life these days. And it came back to my thought process this week for reasons I will get to momentarily. But I think this is always something that's worth considering, especially when you are engaged really in any way, in any sort of public discourse, and especially ones that are online. Because understanding how people think, how people act, why they do the things they do, and what their motivations are is a good way to understand whether somebody is worth listening to and how much you should believe what they're saying. Because it is easy right now, probably more than ever in history, to find yourself falling into an echo chamber, a rabbit hole, something that tells you only exactly what you want to hear. And while this episode is not going to be about AI, especially with the rise of artificial intelligence, so-called, and generative AI, big air quotes, it's easy to just make things up, because now there are machines that will make things up and tell you they are true, as if they know, which they don't. But anyway, that aside. The thing that got me this week was I was reading through some articles, and I have always had, I'm old enough now that I've watched newspapers in particular and media in general in a fairly noticeable decline over the years. It hasn't been that sudden. It's been gradual, at least over the course of my lifetime. So it's been gradual enough for me to see how it has declined. And it has always been a little bit sad for me, because while print media is not always the be-all end-all of reporting and journalism, that sort of thing, or even accuracy and truth, once upon a time, there was at least a belief that there was an ethical responsibility for what was reported to be the most truth that could be presented in a timely manner, right? The efforts as outlined, in the founding documents of this country and a lot of basically the whole world in general, is that you need to have an educated and informed populace who understands what's going on around them and can make informed decisions. And that is important in so many ways that I cannot encapsulate solely in this video. But I think it's fair to say that every right-minded person believes that you should try to be as informed as possible, get a diversity of perspectives, and understand what's facts and what's opinions. And so this week I'm reading some articles, and I don't read as many articles as I once used to, and the reason for that is basically accuracy. There's a noticeable decline in accuracy, and there always has been over the many years that I've been reading, and accountability for that accuracy has gone down the toilet more than ever as well. And so the media outlets and the sources and even individual journalists who once used to be sources of believable truth and factual evidence and researched and informed information have really fallen precipitously, especially in the last 10-ish years. And I ran into this article that was just it was blatant, because what was in front of me was a short, like 2 sentence snippet that said such and such was reported such and such way, and then I'll break, and then another sentence immediately after it that said, but other sources said that this was not true. Or I'm summarizing, but that was basically it. And it just incensed me, because that's not what journalism is. That's not what reporting facts and information is. You don't get to have, you don't ever get to have, for the most part, from a standard journalistic excellence standpoint, you don't get to have singular sources. You have to, verify your sources from multiple locations. And then you do your best to not present anything that could be false. Not even that, you have to be perfect, but don't publish things that are possibly have a probability of being false. And so to see it put in such stark contrast that this journalist, writing for a reputable outlet, just wrote, this was reported by one person and then other people said it wasn't true. Those aren't facts. You don't get to report those as facts. You don't get to, the language that you're using that surrounded that statement presented it as though it was factual. And even if you are presenting it as a caveat that, like, other people have denied it or something like that, that's still, like, not factual. You can't present it as such. You have to, if you're going to present something that is dubious, then you have to present it as dubious, not as factual with a footnote that says, yeah, or maybe not, because that's not what journalism is supposed to be about. Journalism is supposed to be about reporting information so people can be informed, not reporting what the latest gossip from who knows who is. And this got me thinking once again, this is something I think about frequently, about how basically chains of trust are established and broken. Because historically, the reason why this attitude has, including my own attitude, has been had about journalism is that the outlets that reported things were held to certain standards by history and by money. So basically, not everybody could just print whatever they want or say whatever they want. The idea of a newspaper was it was an establishment that, due to the cost of establishing it and the cost of distribution, cost of printing, all these other things, was prohibitively expensive, among other things, to set up just willy-nilly and publish misinformation. You wouldn't do that to a reputable newspaper, because that newspaper's whole income stream was based on the fact that it was regularly delivering meaningful, useful information to its customers. And if it stopped doing that, if it started presenting poor information, people would stop trusting it and therefore would stop buying it, and then the outlet would go out of business. That is no longer how things work. It is in theory a little bit, but not really. And so with the advent of all these, basically what might be looked at as the democratization of media and the ease at which people can just say things and get broad, can be heard broadly about it, basically become a broadcaster in the most traditional sense. It has become a very competitive space, basically. The newspapers are no longer competing against other newspapers. They are competing against every single other potential source of information out there. That could be literally anyone. Somebody on a YouTube short shouting into their camera in their car has in some ways has an equal opportunity to be heard and believed as a newspaper outlet. That shouldn't be the case, but in many ways, that is not necessarily, it is in some senses the faults of these traditional media outlets for not changing or for changing in negative ways. But it's also just the nature of media in the current moment. Accountability for inaccuracy is no longer almost possible, because what's going to happen, basically? Like, speculatively, what would happen if somebody reports a bad piece of information? Well, somebody will start to trust them less, sure. But if you're being inundated with thousands of pieces of information from thousands of sources all the time, it just becomes this wall of noise, and it can be hard to isolate what's meaningful, what's true, what's worth even hearing. And so it has then progressively become an arms race to be first, because that's the only thing that matters for money anymore, is are you the first to report it? Because if you're the first to report something, doesn't matter what size outlet you are, from the individual to a major corporation, if you're the first to report it, you're the first to get the clicks, you're the first to get the interest, you're the first to get the ad revenue. And that's all things come down to these days, is basically ad revenue. So if you're too late, but you're accurate, in all likelihood, you're not going to make nearly as much money as somebody who just screamed a lie, because that's what pays. And there's really no way back out of this, at least not for the wider public. We are in a space now where you are never going to return to only certain sources of information being available. You're not going to return to there are one local newspaper, two national newspapers, and 3 TV channels that you can get. Those days are long over, and they will never ever return unless we hit some sort of fucked up apocalyptic reboot. But we're not going on that route. So what does traditional journalism have to rely on then? Well, it's complicated. The money issue is not something I can unpack here. It's very complicated. But the last bastion of that was the accuracy and the trust. If somebody regularly gives you good information, you trust them. You establish a rapport, whether that's an individual or a media outlet or whatever. If you can verify their information, if it is regularly accurate, if they tell you the weather and it's right 90% of the time, if they give you information about local events that are going to happen and you show up at those events and they actually happen, those are the things that build trust. And on a greater scale, if your outlet tells truths and holds people to factual requirements and all these other things that would be traditionally expected of establishment journalism, those are the things that keep people coming back. And it makes me feel like an old person to say this kind of thing, but that is the reason why there were a few traditional style media outlets that I continued to do my best to trust, because they operated in a traditional way. They, still had traditional journalists who were held to certain ethical standards, and, were going through the traditional editor process where things were checked for accuracy and checked for neutrality and all those sorts of things. And now even that is an industry. Now that I'm sure if you haven't before, I'm shocked if you haven't heard before, there is now an industry and multiple companies vying for your money to filter your media for you, so that you can get either an accurate or inaccurate version of events, if you would, whichever one you would like. There's ones that will sell you, oh, we'll only give you the stuff that caters to your worldview, and there's others that say, oh, we want you to have all the perspectives here, we'll aggregate for you these sorts of things. And that's money on money on money, because money inevitably corrupts. But we're now at this point where I feel out of options. I can trust nothing anymore. The only thing that I have left is myself. I have to take the information that any resource gives me, and I have to go verify it myself. I have to go corroborate it with different outlets that are reporting the same thing, make sure they're not reporting each other, which is a whole thing now. The number of the amount of media that is just people reporting other people's reporting without verifying if the original reporting was accurate at all. That's a whole nightmare rabbit hole to go down. So I have to go look up the primary sources to the best of my ability. I have to go cross-check timelines and locations and things like that to see if basic things are accurate, because nothing can be trusted. And that sounds like a bummer thing to say, but I don't think it's even necessarily that new. It's just a different attitude to be having about news, rather than just, that thing your buddy said, who, has a track record of just saying stuff without actually knowing whether it's accurate or not. It's a different kind of time that we're in now. And especially on the internet, there is just simply no time, no place to be accurate. Because if you're accurate, you go out of business. But I think this is a reminder to all of us as individuals that regardless of what you believe or want to believe or the way you see the world, that trying to not state opinions as facts is possibly more important than ever. To not say with full confidence that such and such is true if you don't have that confidence. And this is a matter of the rhetoric that we choose to use, the word choices, and the framing devices that we use about the things that we say in everyday life. Down to just saying, I think, or I might not have this correct, or I heard. These are all the kind of phrases that can be used both to hide and to show your accuracy and your level of, confidence. And in a time where, as I've talked about before, where people are more likely than ever to deny when they're wrong, to not apologize when they make a mistake, to not admit that anything has been wrong or gone, that anything could have ever been wrong in anything they've ever done in their entire life. That is sort of one of the most noble things we can do these days, is to have humility, to be humble and to say, we don't know, or that we may be wrong, and that there is a common effort among communities to learn from each other, to get a consensus, to get information from as many sources with as much accuracy as possible, and to be informed, and not to fearmonger, and not to wallow in emotional reporting. And when you have as much information as you can, to act on that and to correct people gently when you can. Because it's easy these days to be very loud and very upset and very, very wrong. Even at the level of a huge media corporation. Anyway, that's my feelings. Thank you for watching another Solipsist Rambles. I'll see you guys next time.